So in the rematch between Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr., Conor Benn has just won by clear-cut unanimous decision, in much more emphatic fashion than Eubank won the first time. And I'm hearing two perspectives on this fight. Either Conor Benn has improved a lot, he's made the adjustments, and he's simply better than Eubank now. The other perspective is that Eubank was completely weight drained and was not in condition for the fight. But typically, I always tend to find in these situations it's a mixture of both. Now, Eubank did have some good success in this fight. He was good with his counters and good with his jab. But that's all I can really think of to compliment him here. He won about 2 or 3 rounds at most. Quite literally everything in the first fight was better from Eubank. And as someone who was picking Eubank to win this fight, I had a bad feeling about it from the very first bell. Because I thought Eubank had this I'm about to be chinned look about him. From his body language to the way he was carrying himself in the ring, he just looks vulnerable. Already in the first round he found himself on the ropes, eating shots to the body and around the guard. I can imagine his game plan going into the fight would be to box and move. The first fight was such a brutal ordeal for both fighters. I can imagine Eubank and Bomac deciding to box and move in order to win with as little unnecessary damage as possible. But boxing and moving generally implies being much harder to find. So Eubank finding himself on the ropes is a contradiction to that. While granted I don't think it was intentional, there wasn't much of an effort from Eubank to stop that from happening either. Eubank generally just seemed to have the wrong idea in terms of the game plan for this fight. I think he came in with a more counter-punching method in mind, which may have been where Bomac's influence comes in because he just came off a training camp with Terence Crawford over Canelo. What I saw from Eubank was him actively waiting for Benn to make the first move, so that he could then counter with a stiff jab, check hook or a counter right cross. And there were quite a few moments where Eubank's timing looks really good on the counter. There was one moment in I believe round 4 where Eubank lands a really clean check left hook. Even in the sequence at the end of round 7 where Benn hurts Eubank with a massive right hand on the chin as Eubank is pulling away, Eubank makes an effort to immediately stand his ground and counter, because Benn is still trying to follow up at close range. This is very similar to what Crawford was doing versus Canelo, minus the being hurt in the first place. Canelo would throw first, Crawford would slip or parry, and then counter with a combination, which I definitely have reason to believe that's what him and Bomac were aiming for. The trouble with relying on this strategy versus Conor Benn is that unlike the first fight, Benn was not playing ball and staying in the same position. Benn noticed almost immediately that whenever he came in close, Eubank was ready with a check. So Benn for the most part kept his punches straight and made sure to slip back out of range afterwards, which is why the straight right to the body was so successful throughout the fight. Not only is it a long range punch, it also physically keeps Eubank in the same position, so that it's very difficult to punish Benn for it. Now there was criticism in the first fight for the game plan of Eubank. He was scrapping too much, not doing enough boxing, but at the same time, if he employed the same game plan he had in the rematch, we may well have seen the exact same result. I would say Eubank has a better jab than Benn, but they both use it for different ways. Eubank has a really good counter jab, but Benn has a really good spearing jab. Benn's jab can maintain distance and establish offense, but Eubank's jab is more of a defensive move, as we saw versus Liam Williams. Not to mention just the way Eubank looks physically in the first fight versus Conor Benn. He looks physically stronger, healthier, his demeanour in the ring is much more confident, he seems more fluid, much less stiff, and generally just looks healthier. He was able to confidently press forward and throw combinations, which he wasn't able to do in the rematch even though his current game plan wasn't working. Typically you do try out different game plans if your initial one doesn't work and you're too far down on the scorecards, but Eubank didn't seem to have it in him. Unlike in the first fight where, from the first bell, and especially in round 12, he was absolutely leaving it all in the ring, giving Benn everything he had and taking everything Benn had. In comparison to round 12 in the rematch where Eubank doesn't seem to have any urgency, gets himself dropped by a right hand that slips across the back of the head, does a funny dance, and then ultimately goes down, then gets dropped again for a second time, and is saved by the bell. And Benn ultimately wins by well-deserved unanimous decision. I have heard people say things like the fight was rigged to set up a trilogy, Eubank lost on purpose, but I think I've quite clearly explained here the reasons why Eubank fought the way he did. I think it's all quite explainable, and I personally don't want to see a trilogy whatsoever. I thought the rematch was stretching it. I don't think the first fight warranted a rematch at all. Obviously, in hindsight, it makes sense because Benn went on to lose, but there was no legitimate controversy about the first fight. It was an emphatic win. If they did a trilogy fight with the same stipulations about the weight and rehydration, it would go even worse for Eubank. I don't think he should even be at 160 in the first place. He should be at 168. Having to make 160 3 times now with 3 rehydration clauses will be terrible for his health and not a good idea whatsoever. Now in terms of matchmaking, what do I want to see next from Conor Benn and Eubank? Now Conor Benn and Eddie Hearn are talking about going back to 147. I'd be surprised if he can make the weight safely after 2 fights at 160. 147 is a much better idea in terms of competition if he can make the weight safely. 154 is a lion's nest at the moment, and I don't see Conor Benn having success in that division. I think he would beat Erickson Lubin, maybe Abbas Barao, gimmick fights like Keith Thurman for example. But against the legitimate contenders like Virgil Ortiz, Fundora, Madrimov, Murtazaliev, guys outside the top 5 like Brandon Adams, Sergey Boachuk, Jesus Ramos are a bit too much for Benn in my opinion, especially Jaron Boots Ennis. I think the ideal next fight for Benn now is Ryan Garcia. Continue the momentum. It's another massive fight, it's another intriguing fight. I'm inclined to pick Benn based on the natural size advantage. I think Ryan may shit himself like he did versus Rolly, with Conor Benn in front of him. I also definitely think he'd beat Mario Barrios. Barrios is right there to be hit to the body. As for Chris Eubank Jr., like I said, I think 168 is the move. Ideally, the best move for him would be in a bounce-back fight versus Canelo. At this stage of his career, Canelo is not fighting any legitimate contenders to work his way back up to the title. Eubank is a big name and now a very winnable fight. An alternative is Edgar Berlanga, also coming off a rough loss over Hamza Shiraz. But I am concerned Eubank gets chinned in that one. In terms of other fights on the card, Adam Azim looks really good versus Kurt Scooby. Kurt Scooby wasn't a world level opponent by any means, but he was strong, tough, and someone who at least on paper could give Azim some issues. That would turn out to not be the case. Azim was a level above, several levels above in every single aspect. He had much quicker feet, faster hands, and he beat him to the punch every time. Scooby just sort of tried to survive because there wasn't much he could do. And credit to Azim, because even though Scooby was being so negative, Azim really wanted the finish. He was chasing Scooby around the ring, fighting chest to chest at times, and eventually Scooby's body simply couldn't take the punishment anymore and he went down. He does get up eventually, but the ref had seen enough, and I agree with the stoppage as well. I think ideally I'd like to see Azim fight the winner between Dalton Smith and Subriel Matias. I'm still really torn on who I think wins between Matias and Smith. Azim certainly has the athleticism to hang with anyone in the division. I think the next best thing for Azim to do is leave Boxer, sign with either Matchroom or Queensberry, do what Ben Whittaker did. Speaking of Matchroom, Jack Catterall just got a knockout win over Ekow Essuman. First of all, under the new tutoring from Bozy Ennis, Catterall looks better offensively than he ever has. His pace is better, his countering is better. He looks a lot more fluid in there. He put down Essuman in round 4 with a massive left hand. Keeping in mind Essuman is an incredibly durable opponent, almost has Essuman completely out of there. Now we get to the finishing sequence. Now this is the controversial bit. Essuman comes in, Catterall throws a left uppercut. It doesn't really land, but because they clashed a little bit, Essuman goes down to his knees, and as he's getting up, Catterall loads up on a big straight left. Now during the time Catterall threw and landed that punch, the ref hadn't stepped in, so it was fair enough. But then the ref does step in to separate them, and as he does that, Catterall throws a right hand, and in the process that's the punch that sends Essuman down. And it is a bad knockdown because Essuman's guard is completely down from the separation. At this point many things could have happened. The best option would be to call a timeout, let Essuman take as much time as he can, and then return to the fight if he can. He can take 5 minutes, and if he's ready to fight again, he can. Otherwise it can go to a technical decision or a no contest, whatever the rules are. Or they can call a timeout and deduct a point from Catterall. The referee chose the worst option, which is give Essuman no extra time to recover, and just continue the fight as if nothing happened. Essuman still clearly isn't okay after the knockdown. Catterall then chases Essuman to the ropes, unloads combinations, and eventually folds Essuman through the ropes. Now Catterall was clearly ahead by this point, so I'm not mad about it in the way that it could have gone a different way. But every fighter deserves the same fair treatment. Anyway, in terms of what's next for Jack Catterall, I'm hearing the winner of Devin Haney versus Brian Norman Jr., in which case I really hope Devin Haney doesn't win because I don't want to see Devin Haney versus Jack Catterall. Let him win a boring decision over Rolly, and we can move on. And that's going to do it for the video. Like and subscribe, leave a comment. Goodbye.